The room went quiet right after my father laughed. Not loudly, not in a way that invited anyone to join in just enough to land. I was standing beside the table holding a tray I had been asked to bring out when he said it. Called me difficult, right? There in front of everyone. A few people smiled like they were unsure what to do. My mother adjusted her glass. My sister looked down. No one corrected him. No one even looked at me long enough to acknowledge it. I stayed still, tray in my hands as, if I had been placed there on purpose, I set the tray down slowly, careful not to let the glasses touch too hard. The sound of them clinking felt louder than anything my father had said. For a second, I thought maybe someone would step in. An uncle. A neighbor, anyone who had known me longer than this moment. But the room shifted the way it always did, quietly adjusting around his words, making space for them like they belonged. My father continued talking as if nothing had happened. He moved. Onto a story about work, about people who respected him, about how hard he had worked to build everything we had. People nodded, someone laughed in the right place. It was smooth practiced. That was his strength. He knew how to control a room without raising his voice. I stood there longer than I should have. Not because I wanted to, but because leaving too quickly would have made it obvious. And staying meant pretending I hadn't just been reduced to a passing comment in my own home. Eventually, I stepped back and moved toward the kitchen. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. The door swung shut behind me, and just like that, the noise softened into something distant. Manageable. I leaned against the counter and looked at my hands. They were steady. That surprised me. I thought they might shake or feel different somehow. But they didn't. They looked the same as they always had. Useful quiet. Easy to ignore unless needed. A few minutes later, my mother walked in. Not quickly. Not with concern. Just casually, like she had come to check on something small. She opened a cabinet, took out a plate, and said, "Don't take it personally." He didn't mean it like that. I didn't answer right away. I watched her move around the kitchen, fixing things that didn't need fixing, adjusting what was already in place. He always means it exactly how he says it, I said finally. She paused, but only for a second. Then she shrugged slightly. You know how he is. That was the explanation. The same one I had heard my whole life. Not an apology, not even a denial, just a quiet instruction to accept it. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because continuing the conversation would have turned it into something bigger, and bigger things never ended. Well, for me. She gave me a brief look like she was checking if the situation was under control, then left the room. The door stayed open this time. Voices from the living room drifted back in, steady and uninterrupted. I stayed in the kitchen for a while. After that, finding small tasks to keep my hands busy, wiping counters that were already clean, rearranging things that didn't need to be moved. It gave me something to do other than think about how easily I had been dismissed later when the guests started leaving. I stepped out again. I smiled when people looked at me, nodded when they spoke, played my part the way I always had. No one mentioned what happened. No one brought it up. It was as if it had never existed, but I knew better. That night, after everything was cleaned and the house went quiet, I sat alone at the table. The same table where it had happened. The chairs were pushed in neatly. The glasses were gone. Everything looked normal again. That was the part that stayed with me. How quickly things returned to normal. How easily something like that could happen and disappear without leaving any visible mark. I realized then that what hurt wasn't just what my father said. It was how natural it felt to everyone else. How no one questioned it. Not even for a second. Because it wasn't new, it just wasn't usually said out loud. It didn't start that night. It never does. Moments like that only feel sudden when you haven't been paying attention to the smaller ones. When I was younger, it showed up in quieter ways. My sister would forget something, and I would be the one asked why it wasn't handled. If plans changed, I adjusted. If something went wrong, I explained. It wasn't said directly, but it settled into place. Over time, I was the one expected to absorb the inconvenience. At school events, my father remembered my sister's schedule without checking. Mine had to be written down and reminded. If he missed it, the conversation would shift. He was busy things. Happen, I should have said something earlier. It was always small enough to excuse, never big enough to argue. I learned early how to stay ahead of it. Keep things organized, don't forget details, make it easy for everyone else. It worked in a way. There were fewer moments like the one at the table, but they never disappeared. They just changed shape. By the time I was 16, it had become routine. My sister needed rides. I drove. My mother needed help with errands. I went. My father needed something. Done quickly, I handled it. There was no conversation about it. It was just understood. If I hesitated even slightly, the room would shift. Not loudly, just enough. A pause. A look. A quiet reminder of how things were supposed to work. You're the responsible. One, my mother would say, like it was a compliment. It wasn't responsibility in our house, didn't come with trust. It came with expectation. It meant you carried things, so no one else had to notice them. I didn't mind helping. That wasn't the problem. What stayed with me was how easily my needs disappeared in the process. If I asked for something, it felt like I was interrupting a system that ran smoother without me. Once I had a school presentation I had spent weeks preparing, I told my parents about it more than once. The day came and neither of them showed up. My sister had something else going on. A game, I think. They went there instead. When I got home, my father asked how it went, but he didn't wait for the answer. He was already talking. About something else. My mother said, "We'll make the next one, even though there wasn't a next one." I told them it was fine. And it was in the way things always were. Manageable. Easy to move past if you didn't look at it too closely. That became the pattern. Not dramatic. Not obvious enough for anyone outside the house to question. Just consistent. If something needed to be given up, it was mine. If someone needed to adjust, it was me. Over time, it stopped feeling like a choice. By the time that dinner happened, the words my father used weren't surprising. What surprised me was that he said them out loud in front of people who could see it clearly. But even then, nothing changed. The next morning, everything moved forward exactly as it always had. My mother asked me to pick something up from the store. My father mentioned a task he needed done. My sister left early without saying much. No one referred to the night before, and I didn't bring it up. Not because I forgot, but because I already knew how it would go. It would be explained away, reframed, turned into something smaller than it felt. So I did what I had always done. I adapted, but something had shifted quietly. Not in how they treated me. That stayed the same. It shifted in how clearly I could see it. For the first time, I stopped thinking of it as a series of separate moments and started seeing it as a pattern I had been living inside for years. The boundary didn't come all at once. It rarely does. It built slowly in the space between what I felt and what I allowed myself to say. A few weeks after that dinner, my father asked me to take care of something for him. He said it casually, like it was no different from anything else. There was paperwork involved, some financial details I didn't fully understand at first. He placed it in front of me and said he needed my name on it, just a formality. He said it would help him move something forward faster. I remember reading the first page twice. The words felt heavier then. They should have, not complicated, just final. It wasn't a small favor, it was a commitment. One that would tie me to something I didn't control. I looked up at him and asked what it was for. He sighed, not loudly, just enough to show inconvenience. It's nothing you need to worry about, I'll handle it. That answer should have been enough, it always had been. But something about that night at the table stayed with me. The way the room had accepted his words. The way I had accepted them too. I'd like to understand it first, I said. The room changed, not dramatically. Just that same quiet shift I had learned to recognize. My mother looked up from across the room. My sister went still. It's just paperwork, he said again, this time shorter. I didn't move. The pages were still in my hands, then it shouldn't be a problem if I read it. There was a pause, longer than usual. He leaned back slightly, studying me in a way he hadn't before. Not with anger, not yet. Something else. Calculation, maybe, as if he was trying to decide whether this was temporary or something that would require more effort to correct. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, he said. Maybe I was. That had always been the risk. Asking questions turned simple things into problems, but I didn't lower my eyes. I didn't nod. I didn't reach for a pen. I just want to know what I'm agreeing to. My mother stepped in, then her voice softer, smoother. He wouldn't ask you if it wasn't important. Sometimes you have. To trust family, trust it was a word they used often, usually when they needed something without explanation. I looked down at the paper again. My name was already printed in the corner, waiting for a signature that would make everything official. I understood something in that moment as clearly as I had in the kitchen weeks before. This wasn't about helping, it wasn't about trust, it was about access to my name, my responsibility, my willingness to carry something that wasn't mine. Place the papers back on the table. I'm not signing it, I said. No one reacted right.